We start this hour with new details just into CNN in that horrific firebombing attack in Boulder, Colorado, on a peaceful event highlighting Israeli hostages in Gaza. Sources say that ICE officials have now taken the suspect's wife and 5 children into custody, and they're now being processed. Today, the suspect is being held on $10 million cash bond. He's been charged with a federal hate crime and multiple state charges as well, including 16 counts of attempted murder. Let's get straight to CNN's Priscilla Alvarez for more on that report that we've learned that his family has now been detained. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, all these details are just now coming in that his family, his wife and his 5 children have been taken into Immigration and Customs Enforcement custody. Now, the big question in all of this is what is the legal status of his family, given that we know that he was a visa overstay who later applied for asylum, who later fell out of status with his work permit. So we're still gathering those details as well as the ages of his children. We know, for example, as well from some of these filings that he does have a daughter that graduated high school. That is what, according to these filings, he had not done the attack, executed the attack earlier. But again, the ages and the legal statuses are still outstanding questions here. But as a reminder, as far as his immigration status, 2 big points in his immigration history. One, that he arrived in 2022 on a visa. That is a visa that is meant for tourism. And when someone comes on that visa, they can stay in the United States for 6 months. That is generally the limit. But while he was on that visa, he also applied for asylum, and he received later a work permit that expired in March of 2023. So during that period, he was illegally present in the United States. But this is a bit of a patchwork immigration history, which can actually be quite common. A large number of visa overstayers in the United States, many of whom also apply for different forms of immigration relief when they are here. So we are asking our sources to see whether his family was in a similar situation and what this portends for them moving forward.
Priscilla Alvarez, thank you so much for the latest there. We're joined now by former senior FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole. She's now the director of the Forensic Science Program at George Mason University. Mary, thank you so much for joining us. According to the warrant, the suspect said that no one else had known about this attack, and yet he had been planning it for a year. How do investigators go about determining whether there were signs that he was planning this, if anyone else may have noticed or missed red flags?
That's a great question. And one of the things that we look for immediately are what were the warning behaviors, which generally take place days or a few weeks before an incident like this. So what FBI agents and law enforcement will be doing is going back in his social media to see who he communicated with, who he had contacts with, maybe one-on-one contacts in person, but they'll be looking for that kind of connection with other people. But they'll also be looking for kind of strange behaviors. One of the things that we've seen frequently recently is that domestic violence is oftentimes one of those warning behaviors, because the individual knows what they're going to do and they're thinking about it, and they've made this final decision that could even end up in their own death, or the repercussions could be enormous. And so it's usually family members that are close to the person that hears them talk about how they hate certain groups of people and so on and so forth. And then you have domestic violence. So, but if the family doesn't report that, then law enforcement is not aware of it.
I am curious to get your perspective on his level of premeditation, because as we just heard from Priscilla, the suspect, according to filings, waited until his daughter graduated high school to attack a group that he'd been researching online. He chose to make this makeshift flamethrower and these Molotov cocktails when he couldn't get access to a gun. What does that tell you about his intent?
Well, the intent was definitely there, but he's not a very good planner. Now, it was effective, that's for sure. So the two can't be conflated. But what he did was he got kind of makeshift items that enabled him to carry out this attack. Fortunately, it did not kill anyone, and the number of victims has been somewhat limited. So it's really a plan that he sort of cobbled together in order to allow him to carry something out. But it does show that this is probably someone who doesn't do a very good job of planning, even in his everyday life.
Notably, he told officials, according to filings, that he was planning to die during the attack. He then surrendered after throwing 2 firebombs. What might explain that shift?
It could be a shift, but it also could be trying to sort of develop or create some kind of sympathy from other people. As in other words, saying, "Well, I was prepared to die for this, and I was prepared to lose my family." So it could be an effort to develop some kind of sympathy on the part of the investigators, and that's still not known. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he fully intended to die in that attack, and it was just by happenstance that he didn't. Some offenders will say that to you because after the event, they want to develop the sympathy of the investigators with the hope that maybe they can minimize the impact on themselves or even on their family.
That is so fascinating. He has now been charged with attempted murder and with a federal hate crime as well, but he's not facing terrorism charges. And convicting someone of terroristic acts, that it carries a lot of prerequisites that investigators perhaps don't feel that they have here. What would they need to do that? What additional evidence would they need to file those kinds of charges?
Well, it's really going to be more on the state level because right now there are no federal charges that would equate to them being able, for the federal prosecutor, to be able to charge him with federal terrorism. But what they can do is that once he is convicted of these multiple charges that are pending against him, including hate crimes, and that really does involve a pretty severe sentence, they can always add on to the sentence and bring to the attention of the courts that this really was an act of terrorism, but for the fact that they don't have a specific federal law that allow them to charge him, they still want that to be taken into consideration for the sentencing.
Mary Ellen O'Toole, thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
We're learning very chilling new details about the suspect in the Boulder, Colorado attack on a group marching for the release of Israeli hostages. Authorities say he planned the attack for a year. He's now charged with a hate crime and attempted murder. The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, says anti-Semitic incidents are on the rise here in the United States. They're up more than 300% over the last 5 years. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Why do you think we're seeing such a dramatic rise in these anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish incidents?
Well, thanks for having me. As you pointed out, 2024 was actually the worst year of anti-Semitic incidents since the ADL began collecting that data. And whether it's a combination of factors, Wolf, right? Between social media and extremist groups, we've seen more, not just anti-Semitic attacks, but more hate in general against communities. And Wolf, it's unacceptable to target anyone, to target any religion, and anyone of any background. But the reality is what we saw this week in Colorado was just one incident of many, especially anti-Semitic attacks in the last weeks, right? In Washington, D.C., 2 were killed. We saw an attack on the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. So these are unfortunately all too common.
How do we reverse this trend? What do you think?
Well, I believe deeply in education, and especially with young people, right? I mean, I think it's very, very important that we teach our kids at an early age about, in terms of in the Jewish faith, about the Holocaust, about what happened on October 7th, that we understand the facts and history, but also the fact that every community should, about their history and their background, because that's what makes our country so great, that we're from all over the world and from so many different backgrounds. And we should celebrate those differences and make sure that we appreciate them. And too often now, because of social media and cable news and other things, we're seeing actually more people attacking others, attacking those differences instead of celebrating them. And we've got a lot of work to do, Wolf, obviously, not just because of what happened this week, but because of what happens, unfortunately, every day in communities across our country and here in New Jersey.
There were protests when you visited Rutgers University in New Jersey last month, leading to several arrests. As a high-profile Jewish politician, are you concerned for your own safety?
Well, I definitely think that every elected official has to be careful. I think that's critically important. But, what I'm more concerned about, Wolf, is the safety of the community. And, I was at a temple this morning, and what's so unfortunate is that just to go pray now, you need to have a lot of police outside a temple, right? Or for kids to go to a religious school, you need a lot of law enforcement because people don't feel safe, and that's unacceptable in our great country for people to not be able to go to just have religious freedom and feel safe about that. And what we saw at Rutgers and a lot of our colleges is a huge surge of these incidents, especially anti-Semitic incidents. When I was at Rutgers, as you mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, 4 people were arrested outside where I was speaking. One person assaulted a law enforcement officer with a flagpole with a Palestinian flag on it. That's not who we are as a country, and we obviously should stand up very clearly and make it very clear to everyone there's no place for hate in New Jersey or around our country.